The sound of breaking glass echoed through the marble halls of the Wellington mansion for the third time that week. Victoria Wellington stood in the center of her father's study, her chest rising and falling with anger as she stared at the shattered remains of an expensive crystal vase. Her long blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, but her green eyes burned with fury. "Victoria!" Her father's voice boomed from the doorway. Richard Wellington, one of the most powerful business tycoons in the country, looked exhausted as he took in the scene before him. At 55, his once dark hair was now streaked with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened considerably over the past year. "I don't want to go to Switzerland," Victoria said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. She was 22 years old, but, in moments like this, she reminded Richard of the stubborn 5-year-old who used to throw tantrums when she didn't get her way. "It's not a choice anymore," Richard said, stepping carefully around the broken glass. "The boarding school in Switzerland specializes in helping young women from prominent families learn discipline and proper behavior." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You mean it's a prison for rich girls whose fathers are embarrassed by them?" Richard's jaw tightened. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world, but he was at his wits' end. Ever since her mother died 3 years ago, Victoria had become increasingly wild and uncontrollable. She had been expelled from 2 prestigious universities, arrested twice for public disturbances, and had gone through more personal assistance than he could count. The media loved to write stories about the wild Wellington heiress, and each scandal reflected poorly on his business empire. "Your behavior affects more than just you," Richard said quietly. "The company's stock price dropped 2 points after your incident at the charity gala last month." "Oh, so this is about money," Victoria spat. "It's always about money with you." "This is about family," Richard shot back, his patience finally wearing thin. "This is about honor and responsibility. Your mother would be heartbroken if she could see how you're behaving." The mention of her mother hit Victoria like a physical blow. Eleanor Wellington had been the light of their family, gentle and kind where Richard was stern and business-focused. She had been the buffer between father and daughter, the one who could calm Victoria's wild spirit with just a smile. When cancer took her away, it left a hole in both their hearts that neither knew how to fill. "Don't you dare bring mother into this," Victoria whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "She's already in this," Richard said more softly. "Everything I do is to protect what she built, what she believed in. This family means something, Victoria. Our name means something." Victoria turned away from him, staring out the large window that overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens of their estate. In the distance, she could see the staff quarters where the household employees lived. Her life had always been one of privilege and luxury, but, lately, it felt more like a beautiful prison. "I won't go," she said finally. "Then, you'll lose your trust fund," Richard replied. "And your credit cards. And your car. And you'll move out of this house." Victoria whirled around to face him, shocked. "You wouldn't." "Try me," Richard said, and she could see in his eyes that he meant it. "I've given you chance after chance, Victoria. I've paid for damages, settled lawsuits, and covered up scandals. But I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself or this family's reputation any longer." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Victoria studied her father's face, looking for any sign that he might back down, but she found none. For the first time in years, she realized that she had pushed him too far. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold. "But when I come back from your Swiss prison, things between us will never be the same." Richard's shoulders sagged slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I hope that when you come back, you'll understand why I had to do this." Victoria stormed out of the study, her high heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. She passed several household staff members who quickly averted their eyes and continued with their work. They were used to her outbursts by now, but that didn't make them any less uncomfortable. As she climbed the grand staircase to her room, Victoria caught a glimpse of someone she didn't recognize. A young woman with dark hair was dusting the banister, moving with quiet efficiency. She was probably around Victoria's age, maybe a year or two younger, and she was beautiful in a natural, understated way that was completely different from Victoria's bold, dramatic appearance. When the young woman noticed Victoria staring, she immediately looked down and curtsied slightly. "Good afternoon, Miss Wellington," she said softly. Victoria paused, studying her. "Who are you? I haven't seen you before." "My name is Elena, Mississippi. I started working here yesterday. I'm sorry if I'm in your way." There was something about the way Elena spoke that caught Victoria's attention. Her voice was gentle but not weak, respectful but not fearful. Most of the staff members were clearly intimidated by Victoria's reputation, but Elena seemed calm and composed. "Elena," Victoria repeated, tasting the name. "Where are you from?" "A small town about 2 hours from here, miss." "My family needed the work." Victoria nodded absently and continued up the stairs, but she found herself thinking about Elena as she reached her room. There had been something in the young woman's eyes, a strength that reminded her of her mother in some strange way. Her room was enormous, decorated in shades of cream and gold with antique furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But, as she looked around at all her expensive possessions, Victoria felt empty. What was the point of having everything if you felt nothing? She walked to her vanity and picked up a framed photo of her mother. Eleanor Wellington had been beautiful, but it was her kindness that people remembered most. She had established several charities and was known for her generosity to those less fortunate. Victoria had inherited her mother's beauty, but none of her grace or compassion. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting it to be her personal maid with updates about packing for Switzerland. Instead, Elena entered carrying a tea tray. "Your father asked me to bring you some tea, Miss Wellington. He thought you might need some time to calm down." Victoria studied the young woman more carefully. Elena's dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard black dress and white apron of the household staff. But there was something about her posture, the way she carried herself, that suggested she came from a good family despite their current financial circumstances. "Set it on the table by the window," Victoria instructed. Elena did as requested, moving with practiced grace. As she poured the tea, Victoria noticed her hands were soft but showed signs of hard work. "How long have you been doing domestic work?" she asked. "About 6 months, Mississippi. Since my father lost his job." "What did he do before?" Elena hesitated for a moment. "He was a teacher. History and literature. But the school had to cut staff, and..." She trailed off, as if realizing she might be sharing too much. Victoria found herself genuinely curious about this young woman's story. "And your mother?" "She passed away when I was 16, Elena said quietly, finishing pouring the tea. "It's just me, my father, and my younger brother now." Something in Elena's voice when she mentioned her mother's death resonated with Victoria. Here was someone else who had lost the most important woman in her life, someone who understood that particular kind of pain. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, and she meant it. "How did she die?" "Cancer," Elena replied simply. "We couldn't afford the best treatment, but she fought as long as she could." The parallel hit Victoria like a punch to the stomach. Her mother had also died of cancer, but the Wellington family had access to the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, clinical trials that weren't available to the general public. And yet, despite all their money and resources, Eleanor Wellington had still lost her battle with the disease. "I'm sorry for your loss," Victoria said again, more softly this time. Elena looked up, surprised by the genuine compassion in Victoria's voice. For a moment, the class barriers between them seemed to disappear, and they were just two young women who had experienced similar grief. "Thank you, Miss Wellington. That's very kind of you to say." Victoria found herself wanting to continue the conversation, but Elena was already moving toward the door. "Elena," she called out. "Yes, miss? How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything feels empty?" Elena paused, considering the question carefully. "I think about what my mother would want for me. She always said that grief is love with nowhere to go, but that doesn't mean we should stop loving. We just have to find new ways to express it. The wisdom in those words surprised Victoria. This young woman, who couldn't be much older than herself, seemed to have an understanding of life and loss that Victoria lacked despite all her privileges. "Thank you for the tea," Victoria said. Elena nodded and left the room quietly, but her presence seemed to linger. Victoria found herself thinking about what Elena had said about love and grief. Had she been so focused on her anger and pain that she had forgotten how to love? Had she pushed away everyone who cared about her because it was easier than risking more loss? Later that evening, Victoria sat in her room packing for Switzerland. The school her father had chosen was known for its strict discipline and successful track record of reforming difficult young women from wealthy families. The brochures made it look like a cross between a luxury resort and a military academy. As she folded her clothes, Victoria's mind kept drifting back to her conversation with Elena. There was something about the young woman that intrigued her. Maybe it was her calm strength, or the way she had spoken about her mother's memory with such love instead of bitterness. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she had thought about her own mother with anything other than anger at being left behind. A knock on her door interrupted her packing. "Come in," she called. Her father entered, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. "I wanted to check on you before dinner. How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Victoria looked at him for a long moment. For the first time in months, she really looked at her father instead of just seeing him as an obstacle to her freedom. She noticed the deep lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, the sadness that he tried to hide behind his stern businessman facade. Scared, she admitted, surprising both of them with her honesty. Angry. Confused. Richard sat down on the edge of her bed, a gesture that reminded her of when she was little and he would tuck her in at night. Back then, before the business consumed so much of his time and attention, he had been more present in her life. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "Scared that I'm making the wrong choice. Scared that I've already lost you. Scared that I don't know how to be your father without your mother here to guide me." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. It was the most honest conversation they had had since her mother's funeral. "I miss her so much, Dad. And I miss you too." "I miss you both," Richard said softly. Maybe this time apart will help us both figure out how to find our way back to each other." That night, Victoria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. In just a few hours, she would leave for Switzerland, and she had no idea when she would return home. The thought of being away from everything familiar was terrifying, but maybe her father was right. Maybe she needed time away to figure out who she really was beneath all the anger and rebellion. As dawn approached, Victoria finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of dark-haired young women with gentle voices and wisdom beyond their years. She didn't know it yet, but Elena would be the key to changes that would transform not just Victoria's life, but the entire Wellington household. The next morning arrived too quickly. Victoria's bags were loaded into her father's car, and the household staff gathered in the foyer to see her off. It was a tradition whenever a member of the Wellington family traveled, though Victoria couldn't remember the last time she had paid attention to the formality. Elena stood at the back of the group, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's briefly before looking away respectfully. In that moment, Victoria felt an unexpected pang of regret. She was leaving just when she had met someone who might have understood her, someone who might have become a friend if circumstances were different. The drive to the airport was quiet. Richard seemed lost in his own thoughts, and Victoria stared out the window at the passing landscape. As the familiar sights of home disappeared behind them, she wondered if she would be the same person when she returned. Part of her hoped not. The person she had become since her mother's death was angry and bitter and destructive. Maybe it was time for change. As the plane lifted off toward Switzerland, Victoria closed her eyes and thought about Elena's words about love and grief. Maybe it was time to stop running from her pain and start finding ways to honor her mother's memory instead of dishonoring it. Maybe it was time to learn what it meant to be strong without being destructive, independent without being selfish. The tycoon's daughter was finally ready to be tamed, not by force or punishment, but by understanding and genuine connection. She just didn't know it yet. 6 months had passed since Victoria Wellington left for Switzerland, and the Wellington mansion felt different in her absence. The household staff moved through their daily routines with a sense of calm that had been missing for years. No broken vases, no screaming matches, no police visits in the middle of the night. But, for Elena, the quiet felt strange and incomplete. Elena had settled into her role at the Wellington estate with surprising ease. Her natural grace and intelligence hadn't gone unnoticed by Mrs. Harrison, the head housekeeper, who had gradually given her more responsibilities. What had started as basic cleaning duties had evolved into managing parts of the household correspondence and helping coordinate events. Elena's father had taught her well, and her education showed in everything she did. Richard Wellington had also taken notice of the young woman's capabilities. During the stressful months following Victoria's departure, when business pressures mounted and the media continued to scrutinize the family, Elena had proven to be remarkably competent and discreet. She had a way of anticipating needs before they were expressed and solving problems before they became crises. On a cold February morning, Elena was in the study organizing Richard's files when the phone rang. She answered it professionally, as she had been trained to do when working in the main house. Wellington residence, this is Elena speaking. Elena? The voice on the other end was familiar, though it sounded different somehow. More mature, less sharp around the edges. This is Victoria. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had thought about Victoria often during the past months, wondering how she was adjusting to life at the Swiss boarding school, whether she was happy or miserable, if she ever thought about their brief conversation. Miss Wellington, Elena said carefully, glancing around to make sure she was alone. How lovely to hear from you. How are you? I'm... Victoria paused, as if she wasn't sure how to answer that question. I'm different, I think. The school is intense, but not in the way I expected. It's not just about following rules and proper behavior. They actually make you think about why you make the choices you do. Elena listened carefully, hearing something in Victoria's voice that hadn't been there before. A thoughtfulness, perhaps, or a kind of peace that replaced the angry edge that used to define her speech. I'm glad to hear that it's helping you, Elena said sincerely. Elena, I need to ask you something, and please be honest with me. How is my father? Really? Elena hesitated. Richard Wellington was not an easy man to read, but, over the months, she had learned to recognize the signs of his moods and struggles. He works very long hours, she said carefully. I think he misses you more than he lets on. He keeps a photo of you and your mother on his desk, and I've caught him looking at it when he thinks no one is watching. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking a lot about that conversation we had before I left. About love and grief and finding new ways to express love when someone is gone. I've been thinking about my mother, but also about my father and how I've been treating him. The therapy here is challenging, Victoria continued. They don't just tell you to behave better. They make you dig into why you're angry, what you're really afraid of. I realized that I wasn't just angry about my mother dying. I was angry that my father seemed to move on so quickly, throwing himself into work instead of grieving with me. Elena understood more than Victoria might realize. Her own father had dealt with grief by retreating into books and silence for months after her mother died. Everyone grieves differently, and sometimes those differences could drive families apart instead of bringing them together. Perhaps, Elena said gently, he was trying to be strong for you by not showing his grief. Some people work through pain by staying busy. That's exactly what my counselor said, Victoria replied, surprise evident in her voice. How did you know that? Elena smiled softly, thinking of her father's late-night reading sessions and the way he had buried himself in research projects after her mother's death. Experience, I suppose. I want to come home, Victoria said suddenly. Not because I'm running away this time, but because I think I'm ready to face things properly. But I don't know if my father will believe that I've really changed. Have you? Elena asked directly. Victoria laughed, but it was a warm sound rather than the bitter laughter Elena remembered. Yes, I think I have. I'm not saying I'm perfect now, or that I'll never make mistakes. But I understand things about myself that I didn't before. I want to make things right with my father. I want to honor my mother's memory in a way that would make her proud. Elena felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. The thought of Victoria returning to the house brought both anticipation and uncertainty. The Victoria who had left 6 months ago had been a whirlwind of destruction and anger. But the woman she was speaking to now sounded calmer, more thoughtful. "When are you thinking of coming back?" Elena asked. "In 2 weeks, if my father agrees. The school says I've made excellent progress, but the decision is ultimately his. I was hoping, would you help me? Would you talk to him, feel out his mood? I know it's a lot to ask, but I trust your judgment." Elena was touched that Victoria would trust her with something so important. "Of course, Miss Wellington. I'd be happy to help however I can." After hanging up, Elena sat in the study for several minutes, thinking about the conversation. The Victoria she had just spoken with seemed like a completely different person from the one who had left in anger and rebellion. But people could say they had changed, proving it was something else entirely. That evening, Elena found Richard in the garden. He often walked there in the evenings, especially when he was dealing with difficult business decisions. The February air was cold, but he seemed oblivious to the chill as he stood looking at a memorial bench he had installed in honor of his wife. "Mr. Wellington?" Elena approached carefully. "I hope I'm not intruding." Richard turned, seeming to come back to the present moment. "Not at all, Elena. What can I do for you?" "Miss Victoria called today," Elena said simply. Richard's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders tensed, and his expression became guarded. "How did she sound?" "Different," Elena answered honestly. "Calmer. More thoughtful. She asked about you, wanted to know how you were really doing." Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring at the bench. "Did she say anything about coming home?" "She mentioned that she would like to, but she wanted to make sure you felt she was ready. She doesn't want to come back until she's truly changed." "And what do you think?" Richard asked, studying Elena's face carefully. "Has she changed?" Elena chose her words carefully. "I only spoke with her for a few minutes, but she sounded like someone who has done serious work on herself. She spoke about understanding why she was angry, about wanting to honor her mother's memory properly. She sounded mature." Richard nodded slowly. "The school has sent positive reports. Her counselor says she's made remarkable progress. But I've been disappointed before, Elena. I can't have her come back and immediately return to her old ways. It would destroy what little relationship we have left. Perhaps," Elena suggested gently, "you could speak with her yourself? Hear the changes in her voice?" That weekend, Richard did call Victoria. Elena wasn't privy to the conversation, but she noticed that he seemed lighter afterward, less burdened. When he found Elena in the kitchen the next morning, he had news. "Victoria is coming home next Friday," he announced. "But I've told her that things will be different this time. There will be conditions to her return." Elena felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of conditions, sir?" "She'll start working in the company, learning the business from the ground up. No more allowance without earning it. And she'll be expected to contribute to the household and the community in meaningful ways. If she's really changed, she should be eager to prove it." Elena nodded approvingly. It sounded like Richard was giving Victoria the structure and purpose she had been lacking, while also testing her commitment to change. The week leading up to Victoria's return was filled with preparation. Mrs. Harrison supervised a thorough cleaning of the house, as if preparing for royalty. The staff buzzed with nervous energy, uncertain what to expect from the returning heiress. Elena found herself both excited and anxious. She had grown comfortable in her expanded role at the house, and Victoria's return would inevitably change the dynamics. But, more than that, she was curious to see if the changes she had heard in Victoria's voice would be evident in person. On Friday morning, Elena was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer when the car pulled up the circular drive. Through the window, she could see Victoria stepping out, but this woman looked nothing like the angry, rebellious girl who had left 6 months ago. Victoria's long blonde hair was still beautiful, but it was styled more simply, more elegantly. She wore a simple but well-tailored coat, and her entire posture seemed different. Where once she had moved with aggressive confidence, now she carried herself with quiet grace. Most remarkably, when she saw the household staff lined up to greet her, she smiled warmly instead of ignoring them. "Mrs. Harrison," Victoria said, embracing the head housekeeper who had helped raise her. "It's so good to see you." She made her way down the line, greeting each staff member by name, asking about their families, thanking them for maintaining the house in her absence. When she reached Elena, Victoria paused. "Elena," she said warmly. "Thank you for everything. For the tea that day, for listening, and for helping me reconnect with my father." Elena curtsied slightly, as was proper, but Victoria stopped her. "Please, don't. We're friends, aren't we?" The simple gesture said more about Victoria's changed perspective than any grand speech could have. This was someone who no longer saw herself as inherently superior to those around her, someone who valued connection over hierarchy. Richard appeared in the doorway, watching his daughter's interactions with barely concealed amazement. When Victoria finally approached him, there was a moment of uncertainty between them before Victoria stepped forward and hugged him. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said quietly. "For everything. For the pain I caused you, for dishonoring Mother's memory, for being too angry and stubborn to see how much you love me." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he held his daughter for the first time in months. "Welcome home, Victoria. Welcome home." Over the following weeks, Victoria proved that her transformation was genuine. She arrived at the company offices early each morning, eager to learn every aspect of the business. She started in the mailroom and worked her way through different departments, treating everyone from janitors to executives with the same respect and courtesy. Elena watched this transformation with fascination and growing admiration. The angry, destructive young woman had been replaced by someone who was genuinely interested in other people, who listened more than she spoke, who asked thoughtful questions and offered help wherever she could. But it was in the evenings, when Victoria would often find Elena in the garden or the library, that their real friendship began to develop. They would talk about books, about life, about their shared experience of losing their mothers. Victoria was hungry for genuine connection after months of supervised interactions at school, and Elena appreciated having someone her own age who was interested in ideas and conversations beyond household management. "I keep thinking about something my counselor said," Victoria mentioned one evening as they walked through the garden. "She said that privilege without purpose is just selfishness. For years, I had everything handed to me, but I wasn't using any of it to make the world better." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "My mother used to say that everyone is given gifts, but not everyone chooses to use them wisely." "Your mother sounds like she was very wise," Victoria said. "I wish I could have met her." "I think she would have liked you," Elena replied. "Especially this version of you." Victoria smiled at that. "I hope so. I'm trying to become the kind of person she would have approved of, someone my own mother would be proud of." As spring arrived at the Wellington estate, the changes in Victoria became even more apparent. She established a scholarship fund at the local community college, specifically for students whose families had experienced financial hardship. She began volunteering at a local literacy center, teaching reading to adults who had never learned. She even convinced her father to implement better benefits and working conditions for Wellington Industries employees. But perhaps the most significant change was in her relationship with Elena. What had started as mutual respect had evolved into genuine friendship. Victoria valued Elena's honest opinions and clear thinking, while Elena admired Victoria's determination to use her privilege for good. The household staff noticed the transformation and the growing friendship between the two young women. Some whispered that it was unusual for someone of Victoria's social standing to be so close to a member of the household staff, but Mrs. Harrison, who had watched Victoria grow up, saw it differently. "That girl needed a real friend," she told the other staff members one afternoon. "Someone who cared about her as a person, not because of her money or her father's influence. Elena has been good for her. Indeed, Elena had been instrumental in Victoria's continued growth. When Victoria struggled with business concepts, Elena would help her research and understand them. When Victoria doubted herself or fell back into old patterns of thinking, Elena would gently remind her of how far she had come. When Victoria needed someone to celebrate her successes with, Elena was always there with genuine pride and encouragement. But Elena was changing too. Victoria's friendship had given her confidence and opportunities she never could have imagined. Victoria encouraged her to take business courses at the community college, using the scholarship fund Victoria had established. She pushed Elena to speak up with her ideas for improving household efficiency and staff morale, many of which were implemented with excellent results. One evening in late spring, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, Victoria brought up something that had been on her mind. "Elena, I've been thinking about something. You're incredibly smart and capable, and you have so much more potential than just working as household staff. Have you ever thought about what you really want to do with your life?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I've been so focused on helping my family survive that I haven't had time to think about my own dreams. But lately, watching you work at the company, seeing how business decisions can affect people's lives, I think I'd like to study business. Maybe work in a company someday, help make decisions that benefit employees and communities." Victoria's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. And I have an idea. What if you started working part-time at Wellington Industries? You could learn the business from the ground up like I am, but you'd also be bringing your own perspective and ideas. We need people who understand what it's like to struggle, who care about more than just profit margins." The offer was generous and exciting, but Elena hesitated. What would people say? About me moving from household staff to business employee? About our friendship? Victoria reached over and took Elena's hand. "Let them talk. The people whose opinions matter will see what I see, that you're brilliant and capable and exactly the kind of person this company needs. And, as for our friendship, that's not going to change no matter what our job titles are." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about Victoria's offer. 6 months ago, she had been just a maid trying to help her family survive. Now she was being offered an opportunity that could change her entire future. It was overwhelming, but also incredibly exciting. The next morning, she found Victoria in the study, already deep into financial reports before breakfast. "I've been thinking about your offer," Elena said. "And I'd like to accept it, if you really think I can do it." Victoria looked up with a brilliant smile. "I know you can do it. We'll start slowly, maybe a few hours a week while you continue your studies. But, Elena, I really believe you could help transform this company." As Elena looked at Victoria, confident, purposeful, genuinely caring, she marveled at the transformation that had taken place. The angry, destructive heiress had been replaced by someone who was using her privilege to lift others up, someone who valued friendship and loyalty over status and wealth. Nobody could tame the tycoon's daughter through force or punishment. But love, understanding, and genuine human connection had accomplished what seemed impossible. And, in the process, both young women had found something they hadn't even known they were looking for: a true friend who saw and valued their authentic selves. Summer brought new challenges and unexpected developments to the Wellington estate. Elena had been working part-time at Wellington Industries for 2 months, splitting her time between business training and her household duties. The arrangement worked well, though it created some tension among the other staff members who couldn't understand why Elena was receiving such special treatment. Victoria had insisted that Elena maintain her room in the staff quarters, at least for now, to avoid creating more controversy than necessary. But their friendship had deepened considerably, and they spent most of their free time together, discussing business strategies, sharing books, and taking long walks through the estate grounds. Richard Wellington watched the friendship between his daughter and Elena with a mixture of amazement and concern. He was grateful for Elena's positive influence on Victoria, but he worried about the social implications. The Wellington name came with certain expectations and responsibilities, and society had very specific ideas about appropriate relationships for someone of Victoria's standing. These concerns came to a head when Victoria announced her intention to bring Elena as her guest to the upcoming Wellington Industries annual charity gala, one of the most prestigious events in the city's social calendar. Absolutely not, Richard said firmly when Victoria broached the subject over breakfast. Elena is a lovely young woman, and I appreciate everything she's done for our family, but she's an employee. It would be inappropriate. Victoria set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary, but, when she spoke, her voice was controlled rather than explosive. The old Victoria would have screamed and thrown things. This new version had learned to channel her passion more effectively. Elena is my friend, Victoria said carefully. She's also one of the smartest, most capable people I know. If I'm going to represent Wellington Industries at this gala, I want to be surrounded by people who share our values and vision for the company. People will talk, Richard warned. There are already whispers about your unusual friendship. Bringing her as your guest to the gala will fuel speculation and gossip that could damage both your reputations. Victoria looked at her father with disappointment. I thought you understood that I've changed. That I've learned to value people for who they are, not what society thinks about them. Elena has proven herself over and over again. She deserves to be recognized for her contributions, not hidden away because she doesn't come from the right family. Elena, who had been dusting in the hallway, overheard the conversation. She felt her heart sink as she listened to the argument. The last thing she wanted was to cause problems between Victoria and her father, especially when their relationship had improved so dramatically. That evening, Elena found Victoria in the garden, sitting on the memorial bench dedicated to her mother. Victoria looked frustrated and sad, staring at the flowers they had planted together in Eleanor's honor. I heard what happened this morning, Elena said quietly, sitting down beside her. And I think your father is right. Victoria turned to her in surprise. You do? Elena nodded. I appreciate what you're trying to do, truly. But I don't want to be the cause of problems between you and your father. Your relationship with him is too important to risk over something like this. It's not just about a party, Elena, Victoria said passionately. It's about what we believe in. If I'm going to inherit this company someday, I need to start making it clear that things are going to be different. That we're going to value merit and character over social status and wealth. And I admire that, Elena replied. But change takes time, especially in established social circles. Maybe we need to find ways to prove my worth in the business world before challenging social conventions. Victoria studied her friend's face. You really don't want to go to the gala? Elena smiled softly. Of course I'd like to go. I've never been to anything so elegant and glamorous. But I'd rather watch you succeed and change the